The plane had dropped him off on a frozen airstrip carved into the side of the mountain, surrounded by jagged peaks that seemed to press down on the sky. Nolan Reeves had come to Alaska to escape, like he always did, but this time he wanted more than solitude. He wanted a story. A story that could resurrect his career as a journalist, a story that would shock readers, make them tremble in their warm city apartments while he drank instant coffee under the looming silence of snow-laden pines. He had read about a village that time had forgotten, a place locals never spoke of on weather reports or maps. The signs he found online were cryptic, half factual, half legend. No one lives there anymore. One site said, "Stay away after sunset," said another. But Nolan thrived on warnings. They were invitations in disguise. The trek to the village was harder than he imagined. A week's worth of supplies stuffed into a battered backpack weighed him down as he climbed the icy trail. The wind whipped against him, carrying fragments of unseen things, a branch snapping under invisible weight, a faint laughter carried on gusts that had no source. He chalked it up to his imagination, or maybe to the altitude. Yet every time he stopped to catch his breath, he noticed a movement in the tree line, the subtle sway of shadows that didn't belong to any tree. His pulse quickened, but he pressed on. On the third day, the trees thinned and he stumbled into a clearing. There it was, the village, or what was left of it. The buildings were blackened, some half, buried in snow, others leaning at precarious angles. Wooden shingles had rotted, windows gaping like empty eyes, doors hanging open on broken hinges. Smoke rose from none of the chimneys. A low fog clung to the ground, curling around the collapsed porches like fingers. It was silent, not the comforting quiet of nature, but the oppressive, expectant quiet of a place that had been waiting. Nolan set up his base in what had once been a general store, its shelves empty, dust motes floating in the weak afternoon light. He turned on his recorder and spoke aloud, just to hear human sound in the stillness. "Day 1, village appears abandoned. No tracks in snow other than mine. Structures intact enough for shelter. Odd sense of being observed, though no visual confirmation. Investigating further." He forced himself to smile, but the corners of his mouth trembled. The silence outside seemed to tighten, to lean closer. He explored the village, noting details for his article. A bakery with flour still caked into cracks of the floor, a schoolhouse with tiny desks frozen in place, a church with pews covered in frost. Each building he entered made him feel smaller, like the village was swallowing him piece by piece. Outside, the mountains seemed to close in, their sheer faces reflecting the dim light in ways that made the snow look darker than it should. He started hearing things, a creak, a whisper carried on the wind, a fleeting shadow in the corner of his vision. Each time he spun around but saw nothing. On the second night, he set up a fire in the store. The cold was ruthless, and the wind rattled the roof. As he wrote in his notebook, he felt it. A presence, patient and watching, not moving but occupying the space just outside perception. His rational mind insisted it was exhaustion, isolation, or the eerie effect of the wind. He told himself over and over, "It's the mind playing tricks, nothing more." Then came the first footsteps. Slow, dragging slightly, as though the snow resisted them. He froze, listening. They circled the building, pause, then retreat. He called out, his voice cracking. "Hello." No response, only the wind. He thought he saw a figure, a flash of movement at the edge of the clearing. He blinked, and it was gone. Nolan's chest ached as he tried to convince himself it was a trick of shadows, a leftover fragment of imagination. By day 3, he noticed the snow around the village seemed altered. Footprints that weren't his appeared and disappeared with no discernible pattern, some dragging as though something heavy passed through them. In the schoolhouse, a faint scent of smoke lingered, but no fire had existed. In the church, he found a hymn book open on a pew, pages yellowed and brittle, the writing inside in a neat, deliberate hand he did not recognize. It read simply, "The eyes are never asleep." He shivered, tucking the book under his coat. Nolan tried to leave, but the trail he had marked with strips of red fabric had vanished. No matter which way he walked, the mountains seemed to shift around him, paths that were there one moment gone the next. Compasses spun uselessly. Even the sun's position seemed wrong, never quite overhead where it should have been. He stopped believing in rational explanations. He had read about cognitive distortions in extreme isolation, but nothing had prepared him for this. The third night brought the sounds he could no longer deny. Voices, whispered not words, but syllables shaped like speech. They echoed from the mountains, then the village itself, sometimes overlapping his own movements. Every time he turned, the air was empty. Yet he knew he wasn't alone. He barricaded himself in the store, piling chairs against the door, trying to ignore the scraping, tapping, and occasional laughter that drifted in with the wind. At some point during the night, he found himself standing outside, shivering, fire long dead, notebook abandoned. He had no memory of leaving. The village stretched before him in a way it hadn't before, buildings taller, alleys longer, shadows deeper. And he saw them for the first time, figures emerging from the corners of structures, thin and pale, faces featureless, bodies swaying in unnatural harmony. They didn't walk. They drifted, gliding a few inches above the snow. Nolan wanted to run, but his legs refused. His breath fogged, and the figures surrounded him, circling closer, silent, patient. He tried screaming, but the sound was swallowed instantly. His recorder lay on the snow, playing back his own voice from earlier that day, only twisted, overlapping, layered with another tone, softer, mocking, intimate. The figures bent closer, as if listening. Then, in unison, they repeated his words, "We've been waiting." Nolan collapsed, terrified but helpless. When he woke, he was inside one of the houses. It was warm, though he could feel the chill through the floorboards. The room was furnished as if occupied, a fire crackling, kettle on the stove, bed made neatly. A window looked out onto the village, but it was different alive. Smoke from chimneys spiraled into the sky. Figures moved through the streets as if nothing were wrong. A family, children laughing, adults tending animals. The smell of bread and stew filled the air. A voice came from the corner. It was human, warm, but unfamiliar. "You're not from here," it said. Nolan spun. No one was visible, yet the voice seemed to come from everywhere. No one is, and yet something cold grazed his spine. "You've been expected." He stumbled back toward the door, but the village outside shimmered and shifted, buildings stretching impossibly, snow climbing vertical walls. His surroundings weren't real. His mind screamed that he had to leave, but he couldn't. The more he ran, the deeper into the village he found himself. Trails he had walked became labyrinthine, impossible. Every step he took led him back to the schoolhouse. The hymn book lay open on the desk, pages fluttering, whispering, "They remember your name." By dawn, the sun rose, weak and cold. Nolan was outside again, standing in the center of the village. The figures were gone, the wind quiet, snow pristine. He sprinted down the trail he thought led to the mountains, breaking through the tree line, past the pines, never looking back. When he finally stumbled onto a frozen airstrip, the small plane he had arrived in sat waiting. No one was aboard. The door creaked in the wind. He didn't stop. Back in civilization, Nolan tried to convince himself it had been a dream, an illusion brought on by isolation, cold, and exhaustion. But when he unpacked his gear, the hymn book was in his backpack, yellowed pages, neat handwriting. "We've been waiting, always waiting." He threw it into the fire. The flames swallowed it, smoke curling like fingers toward the ceiling. That night, he could hear whispers outside his window, soft and indistinct, repeating his name. His walls shivered as though something pressed against them from the other side. Sleep was impossible. The air in the room was thick, heavy, expectant. He turned on every light, but the shadows persisted, dancing just beyond the glare. And in the corner of the room, when he dared to glance, he saw them, tall, faceless figures, drifting silently, waiting. He left the city the next morning, driving north, then west, constantly checking the rear-view mirror. Every so often, when the fog rose on the highway or the tree line pressed close, he swore he could see the village, small and perfect in the snow, figures walking calmly through it as if he had never existed. Years later, he spoke to a local historian about the village. The historian shook his head slowly. "No one has lived there for over 70 years, he said. "It doesn't even appear on most maps anymore. The storms and snow have buried it. People go missing up there sometimes, but it's never found. It's like it chooses who to let see it." Nolan never wrote his story. He didn't try to explain it. At night, though, when the wind carries just right, when snow scratches against his windows, he still hears the laughter of children, the hum of distant voices, the faint scent of bread and smoke. And he knows somewhere deep in his mind that the village is waiting, always waiting. Even now, when he closes his eyes, he can see the path twisting through the snow, the mountains shifting impossibly, the faceless figures drifting silently toward him. And he knows, with a clarity that terrifies him, that one day he will return, not because he wants to, but because the village remembers him. And when it does, it will not let him leave again.